Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I was kind of a last-minute sub out, but you guys gave me a really good excuse to spend my post-birthday weekend with grown-ups instead of small people. So thank you for that. I want to pre-apologize for this really annoying, non-contagious cough that I have. I promise that it is more uncomfortable for me than it will be for you, as I pee my pants ever so slightly every single time that happens. Now is when everyone can text their mom to thank them for the last 27 to 32 years of pants peeing that they have done on your behalf. Anyway, the talk that I'm going to give today is called Finding Yourself Over and Over Again. And I think it's about kind of like staying in touch with who you are constantly over the course of your life and your career, and how sometimes long-term goals can be a little bit detrimental because we put our blinders on, and by the time we get to the end of where we think we want to be, we are a different person by the time we're there. What I will tell you is this is not really a do-what-you-love talk, because I'm sure you've seen plenty of those over the years. They're usually about pursue your passions and quit your day job, abandon all responsibilities. And I, probably would have given that talk pretty directly, maybe 5 to 7 years ago. And then all of a sudden, all of this stuff started compounding, and I started having sleep problems and all the things that happen when your body turns into a real adult body. And so, and another thing that happens from these do what you love talks is they can be really kind of like anxiety-inducing for some people, because all of a sudden you start asking yourself these questions like, what do I love? Who am I? Who am I, really? And all of a sudden you leave the talk and you're just like, I literally have no idea what I want. Am I supposed to love things? Am I loving things, or am I just allowed to collect money and to be a creative person? And all of this stuff starts happening when you're really little, actually, because we all start getting asked this question of what do you want to be when you grow up? Think about how small you were when you first got asked that question. Probably very, very small. And it's such an interesting question because it has so much to do with what you're going to do with your life rather than who you're going to be. And I think who do you want to be when you grow up is a much more important question to be asking little kids and also ourselves constantly. Because who we're going to be when we grow up is this confluence of who we were, and these are my glamour shots from age 13, which I was fully mortified about. They were taken in a hotel room in a Best Western, and I told my mom I wanted to burn them because I asked her for glamour shots because all the cheerleader girls were getting these really beautiful I'm 32 years old in the body of a 14-year-old shots. And when I got these back, I was just horrified, because I was born in 1984, not 1971. And then, so it's who you were, who you are currently, and then who you hope to be. And that's really what determines all that in the future. So we'll talk a little bit about who I was. If you would have asked me 10 years ago, I've been working as a freelancer for 10 years now, and I've been a designer, a professional designer, for 12 or 13 years. I would have led with, I'm a design illustrator. I spent 2007 to 2011 in New York. It was so formative and amazing. I worked for Louise Feely. She's as much of a legend to work for as she is based on the work that you see. And I learned so much, and I was obsessed with design. I lived and breathed it every second of the day. All I did was work. I worked from 9 to 6 working for Louise, and then I went home and tried to keep this second entire career of freelance illustration and lettering going on the side. And it felt so natural, and I have a friend actually who's around my age that just apologized on the internet for loving working still. He's like, I feel like I need to apologize for feeling like I'm getting so much fulfillment from my work, because there is this whole kind of take care of yourself movement. I think you have to just do what feels right, but you have to really ask yourself some hard questions about, why am I working so hard? Is it because you're trying to fill a void? Is it because you're trying to avoid dealing with something more intense? Or is it because you are truly that passionate? And for the beginning part of my career, it really was because I was truly that passionate. But I think it also had to do with this question that everyone in New York asks each other when they meet each other. So I didn't really notice that this was a thing until I moved to San Francisco, but every time I go back to New York, it still follows me there, which is the first thing that friends that have known you forever, they ask you is, what are you working on? And I think that this really simple social interaction perpetuates that work-obsessed culture in such a weird way, because you always want to have a good answer to that question. Like, you never want to go to a design party and someone says, what are you working on? You're like, nothing really, mostly playing Fortnite. You know, like, you want to have an answer. And so therefore, you tend to always make sure that you have enough stuff on your plate to keep you interesting. When really, it doesn't have to be the work that keeps you interesting, and actually, the other things that you have going on are going to be the thing that make you more interesting as you grow up. From 2011 until present, I've been living in the Bay Area, and when I moved to San Francisco, you know, my whole life shifted for different reasons. I suddenly went from this like crazy design freelance mega culture where I was surrounded by a bunch of fellow workaholics and all we did was hang out and work, to moving to a place where most of my friends work in tech. Most of them have really normal hour jobs, and I felt like the weirdo for turning down a dinner date offer to work on something that I was interested in. And after the third or fourth time that started happening, I started really adjusting my life to accommodate the social settings around me. And part of that too had to do, I noticed this, is that this question of what are you working on shifted to how are you? And it's so weird because, like, as I was there, I was still working a lot. I was making a lot of projects that I was super proud of and interested in. You know, during this time is when I worked on Moonrise Kingdom. I got to work on a ton of books for Barnes & Noble. I even did some work for the Oscars and got to go to the Oscars, and that was really cool. They texted me the morning of the show to tell me that they didn't use any of my work, which was fun. And one thing that I did not know about going to the Oscars is you cannot take an Uber there, because they give you a separate, like, arrival sheet and exit sheet, so the same driver has to be the one to bring you home. And because I didn't want to pay a limo to, like, sit in a parking lot for 5 hours, I had to borrow my friend Michelle's, who's here, PT Cruiser to go to the Oscars. And it was super awesome to drive down this, like, barricaded highway while all these people are looking for celebrities in her PT Cruiser. It was like the highlight of the experience, actually. But what ended up happening is everyone kept asking me, how are you, how are you? And I would be like, oh, I'm great, I just did this stuff or whatever. Oh, I'm great, I just did this project that I love. And over time, it just started feeling really awkward, like I was bragging about my work all the time to my friends, when really they actually wanted to know how I was and what I was doing and like how I emotionally was feeling and all this stuff. And so I started like deprioritizing work in my life as a thing that defined me, and it was really important that that transition happened, because while I was living in San Francisco, this also happened. I had my daughter in 2015, and I don't know if you guys can tell, I am having another person, which is also why the cough peeing is a thing. But I had my son in 2017. And, you know, when you have a child, when you transition into parenthood, you do start asking yourself these questions of like, who am I? And sometimes it turns into this sort of like, what is my role? I am redefined as a human being. I felt like I was really able to sort of maintain my personhood throughout the process. But all of a sudden, like, it wasn't really all of a sudden, it was this really slow transition where after I had my daughter, I just started feeling really wigged out about stuff. I was getting super anxious all the time. I was having these like OCD thoughts where I couldn't get something out of my head all day long. I had like obsessive anxiety over things and had those teenage nighttime feelings, like, you know, when you were like 15 and stared at the ceiling and would be like, I can't believe I said that to Jenna, you know, or whatever. And I started having those again. It had been like, you know, 20 years since I had these thoughts, and it was just really off-putting. And I had this like beautiful cherubic person in my life, but it was so hard to actually like feel all the joy of it, and actually even to bank memories of it all. And it wasn't until I had this second tiny cherub that I realized what had actually happened. When you have a baby, you go into your doctor's office 6 weeks postpartum, and they make you fill out a questionnaire that's basically like, how upset with the world are you? And then they rank it. It's like one of those 10-question surveys, and then they're like, oh, you only said yes to 2, you're fine, moving on. And I felt totally fine right after I had my daughter. But at about 9 months in to around like 14 months in, I started like, all of a sudden, all this anxiety started happening. I couldn't control it. I had horrible insomnia. And I realized when I had my son that what had happened was I had postpartum depression, but it didn't start kicking in until around month 4 or 5. And this is something that every woman should talk to her doctor about, because doctors do not talk to you about this. It's totally a hearsay thing that you find out about on the internet, and you have to discover like a random mom blogger's post about her like weaning depression in order to have an understanding of what you're going through, because most people think about postpartum as being the baby blues that happen right away, when it can manifest in a million different ways. First time for me was anxiety. Second time with my son was way more classic. I was just like, everything was hard. I would be like, oh my God, I have to floss my teeth again, you know? And in the end, I ended up just feeling super lost. I didn't know what to do. I felt like it was all hitting at this like, oh my God, is my career over? Like, is parenting gonna totally like take me off the map? And I was blaming it on everything except for my kids, because I thought that it couldn't possibly be postpartum, because postpartum happens right after you have a baby. And when I first started doing lettering, you know, I felt like there were like 12 of us or like 15 of us in this sort of early next wave of lettering. And then all of a sudden, there started to be more and more. And then by the time I had my kids, it was like, I felt like I was in a sea of talented people that did not have human beings that were breastfeeding off of them. And I was like, how am I going to keep up with all this awesome talent everywhere that I, you know, feel like I played like a fun part in helping to generate, but I was really intimidated about how do I stay relevant? How do I work in the same capacity? Will I ever work in the same capacity? And all of this time, you know, like having a lot of time to myself to actually sort of process things was really intimidating, because I never had that before. I was such a workaholic. All I would do is just bury myself in projects if I was feeling shitty. So like work is a way for me to work was my therapy. I talk to my therapist now. I'm like, I would not need you if I could just spend 8 hours a day vectorizing again, but that doesn't happen, so now here we are. And so I started really asking myself a lot more of these, like, who am I questions. I started trying to get to the core of what makes me tick and what makes me me. And I feel like I always have been kind of a self-examiner, but all of a sudden I hit this stride where it's like all I wanted to do was self-examine. I did, you know, every quiz that you could possibly do under the sun. I'm an ENFJ for anyone else in the crowd that happens to be that Myers-Briggs type. Who's an INFJ in this crowd? There you go. You guys are my natural best friends, I have determined. All of my best friends have been INFJs because I can out-alpha you and then we can all hang out without competing against each other. I'm a number 2 on the Enneagram. Anybody else a number 2? I don't know. This one's a harder test because all of the descriptions make you sound like a terrible person, except maybe the number 2. So maybe I'm not a number 2 and I just don't want to accept that I'm one of the other ones. But I know that I am a helper because I'm the person that kind of like follows you throughout life if you seem lost on the subway. And then here are my love languages in case we're ever in like an intimate relationship. I even got into crystals for a little bit, you know, like, I'm actually super into, like, I make jokes with my friends. I live in the Bay Area, you know, I'm allowed to love crystals. It's the crystal capital of the world. But I make a joke that I like to vacation on Woo Woo Island, but I'll never live there. And the thing that I really like about the crystals thing and the tarot thing and whatever is they're all just tools for introspection. So to me, like if I go into like a witch store and I'm reading, I'm like, I really just want to buy a thing that's shiny. You know, that's all that I want. And I read the description and I go, that describes generally my malaise of the week. And then I pick it up and I hold it and I go, oh, I've just acknowledged that I have a thing in me that I want to address and fix. Therefore, the crystal has done its power, no need to bathe it in moonlight. And then the biggest thing that I've done for myself is therapy, which is the most magic thing in the entire universe, and I wish everyone could be in therapy. It is the slowest thing ever that you can do to completely change your life. I was reaching out to therapists being like, I'm in an emergency, I need you just for the next 3 hours. And they're like, that's not how therapy works. You mostly just need to take an anti-anxiety pill if you don't want to commit to therapy. And so I started going maybe 3 years ago, and it is completely crazy how just talking to a person can suddenly shift from feeling like you have no control over your body when you're in those sort of like crazy anxious moments, to feeling like you have the capacity to actually zoom out and see things from a more objective perspective. It's crazy. And I started really kind of going back and looking at who I was and thinking about myself as a kid. I've always described myself as being like a really sensitive kid, and my mom said that I was like the ideal child because I was just so easy and like they never had to punish me. And now that I have a daughter myself who I feel like is actually kind of my emotional twin, even though like I'm like, oh my God, just get over it already. She has a lot of the same DNA, literally and also figuratively, that I had, and she's just like gets so hung up on stuff and is so worried about like getting things right, and that was me as a kid too, and I had always just thought about that as being sort of like overachieving or being a little sensitive or whatever, when really that's just like child anxiety. That's all that is. And I thought about who I was in high school. I thought about how hard I tried to do everything that I thought I could do to be cool, when really I should have just stayed friends with like the weird art kids that pierce their ears with safety pins. And like I was like, you guys seem a little too interesting for me. I'm gonna go try to join the cheerleading squad, even though there's absolutely no chance in my entire life I'll ever be able to do a split. And then I also looked at who I was just even in my 20s and celebrated it, you know, and tried to look at it as like, this is a time that has passed. Your therapist would say, it's time to grieve it or whatever. But I had such a blast in New York and met such amazing people, and I'm trying to figure out a way to have a relationship with that stage of my life in which the nostalgia doesn't turn toxic and then I miss it too much. And so examining who I am now and trying to bring that into my work and let it affect my work a little bit more is something that I'm trying to do. You know, as a freelancer, you're really, sometimes you feel like you're on the whim of whatever comes into your inbox. But I try to be way more conscious of the work that I take on now and try to tick more boxes in terms of what makes me happy and what makes me tick than I ever did in the past. One of those things is, you know, working on logotypes. So logotypes, the reason why I love them so much is not because I love to make logos, it's because I love to help people. And I love excuses for teaching. And so a part of my logo process, I do a lot of logo revision work. And at the beginning of my first deck, I include this logo evaluation handbook, which is probably more than you guys learned about logos in 4 years of college, packed into 4 pages of a PDF. And a lot of people get like a little scared about educating their clients too much. You know, there's a phrase of like, a little bit of knowledge is dangerous. Whereas I feel like knowledge should never be dangerous. If you are afraid of knowledge, you are on the wrong side of the camp. Like, you really need to help give people the knowledge so that they can then take that knowledge into the world and be your advocate for you. Like, when I give knowledge to my clients, it helps them justify what they pay me. It helps them go to their like fancy CEO meetings that I assume happen on yachts and stuff, and then talk about why those like little tiny subtle changes that they made to their logo were necessary, and parrot some like really intense nerdy typographic stuff back to people, and then blow those people's minds like how we do sometimes when we like talk about kerning to like your random non-design friend. And I started taking on work, you know, it was still fun and colorful and interesting, but I had a much higher bar for the work that I would take on. You know, I wouldn't, if something even seemed really appealing, but I knew that it would overload me or outstress me and it would put like this huge burden on my life that I couldn't handle at the time, I wouldn't take it on. But there was something that was really missing from my work still, even after these changes were made, and that was vulnerability, right? So what I've been really good at over the years is separating myself from my work. And I think that can be really good. It's a really good thing to do, to not have yourself be so tied into every single thing that you create. Because if you feel like everything that you make is a reflection of you, criticism is terrifying. And it can tear you down, and if you're in a weak moment, you're just not able to actually handle it. So I've been really good about being able to make work that I feel like lives on its own and doesn't define me. But it had been a really long time since I had made something that was really personal, something that really I felt like I could throw all of my emotional eggs into the basket of. And my, title, what I thought about myself had shifted so much over time. I went from being a design illustrator to being so much more complicated. If I introduced myself to you on the street, I would not be like, oh, I'm a lettering artist, that's all, the end. You know, I would tell you everything about my life and not just that one part about my life that happened to take over. And then when I think about who I hope to be, you know, I think that once you address a lot of the things that are getting in your way as a person, like once you actually take time to take care of yourself, take time to, you know, set yourself up for success in the future, you don't have to be as concerned about who you will become, because those things will happen because you're taking down the roadblocks along the way. And as a parent, really, like, all I can focus on is who I hope they'll be. And so in 2016, my daughter was about 9 months old, and this was like the golden age when she like learned how to turn the page in a book, and we finally thought of her as like a person. And it was awesome. And then I was so unfamiliar with like the world of children's books because I was not one of those adults that just collects cool children's books. I'm very regretful of not being that because I would have been ages ahead, and now I have a bunch of llama books, which are fine. But I thought about a lot of the books that influenced me as a kid, and you know, just how impactful children's books as a medium can be. And I thought a lot too about the work that I do that is not paid work as a designer, which is like, I love this role that people have allowed me to play of being the like design leader, advocate, therapist to young designers. Like every email that I get from a person that's like, I don't know what I'm doing, please help me, you seem nice. I love those emails so much. They literally are what fuels me creatively, is being able to feel like I can have a personal impact on people. And so when I was thinking about the work that I wanted to do within the children's book sphere, I really thought about, like, how do I make something that has a message that, like, resonates in a bigger way and addresses a lot of the things that I'm concerned about in terms of how I work with young designers and how I work with all people. So I wanted to make something that was really encouraging. And so I made this list of a bunch of encouraging words. I happened to stumble across a text document online that was just hundreds of positive attributes of humans. And I culled it down into a spreadsheet, and then culled it down even more into this. And while the book itself was meant to be about encouragement, I really wanted to deal with a lot of the things that we all deal with as adults that start really young, and that we don't really realize start as young as they do, which is our fear, anxiety, and self-doubt. You know, the fear of messing up, anxiety about what other people think, and self-doubt and distrust in our abilities. So while encouragement is the sort of surface of the book, the real depth of it, the message at the core of it, is about self-forgiveness. It's all about like setting up intentions, but then teaching yourself how to deal with the fallout, because we don't always achieve everything that we set out to do. And we should be happy about that, and we should see failure as a positive thing and not see it as the thing that totally derails us and prevents us from doing it in the future. So if it's cool, I will read my storybook to you. We will have some storybook time on stage. It's called Tomorrow I'll Be Brave. Tomorrow I'll be adventurous, I'll play and I'll explore. I'll make or learn or try something I've never done before. Tomorrow I'll be strong, I'll climb and jump and run. It doesn't matter if I win as long as I have fun. Tomorrow I'll be smart, I'll think before I act. I'll solve a puzzle, read a book, and learn a fun new fact. Tomorrow I'll be curious, please teach me something new. I'll ask why 1,000,000 times, maybe 1,000,000 too. Tomorrow I'll be creative, I'll color and draw for hours. I'll play a game of make-believe and use my magic powers. Tomorrow I'll be confident, I'll be proud of all I know. I'll stop and smile and think about how much you've helped me grow. Tomorrow I'll be brave, there's nothing I can't do. I won't be scared, but if I am, I know that I have you. Tomorrow I'll be all the things I tried to be today, and if I wasn't one of them, I know that it's okay. But tonight I'm very sleepy, so now it's time to rest. Tomorrow I'll be all these things, or at least I'll try my best. So when I had first conceived of Brave, this is not a very well-known fact, and this is my special announcement of the day. I had actually sold the book through to Penguin as 2 books. And because they were going to be released like way far apart from each other, I haven't talked much about the second book, but I'm really pumped to talk to you guys about it today. So when I had this list, I could not get it down to just these 7 words. The 7 words that I picked for Brave, I picked for Brave because they had this really like effervescent energy. It was all this like get up and go, take on the world. And it was all about you, the person, the reader, and making your own life better. But there were these other words that I felt like were super important that I really wanted to include. So when I ended up talking to Penguin about the book, it was really 2 books. And these 2 books are 2 sides of the same coin. One, Brave, is about making yourself better just for you, about setting yourself up for success, about, making a life, carving out a life that you want. And the second book, which is Tomorrow I'll Be Kind, is about making you better for the world.